Well, this is the continuation of this series that I started several weeks ago about writing your own story in 2021. That no matter how you ended 2020, no matter what your life looked like in 2020, that 2021, you have the opportunity to kind of reboot, don't you? That you can restart in a whole new way. And so we've been talking about several of the things that will need to change in us. Last week we talked about not being, in other words, refusing to live in guilt. That we would not sit around with a frown on our face and be pouting all the time about the stuff we've messed up in our lives. We've all messed up. Some of us worse than others. But we know that God forgives each and every one of us, and that Satan would love to have you continue to carry that guilt around on your back and feel terrible for the things that you've done, instead of be set free from the guilt of those sins. And that's why Jesus died on the cross, to set you free from the guilt of your sin. Just look at your neighbor and say, "You're not guilty." Go ahead. You're not guilty. We have to remember that through Jesus Christ we're not guilty. And so today we're going to be talking about growing your emotional intelligence. Now, how many of you have heard that term before, emotional intelligence? Have you heard that term before? I see a few hands going up. I posted a tool on Facebook. Did you guys see that? Where you can do this survey. It takes about 45 minutes, and it's from Psychology Today, so it's based in pretty good science. And it will give you a score of your emotional intelligence. I got an 85. I don't know whether I'm happy or sad about that. I'm okay with it. I guess I'm okay with it. But let's talk about this for a minute. Emotional intelligence. I would say that emotional intelligence, for us as followers of Jesus, equals spiritual emotional maturity. Spiritual emotional maturity. And so I wonder, would we consider ourselves, as we sit here this morning, would we consider ourselves spiritually, emotionally mature? Because here's what I believe, and I think this is being proven out by just studies on relationships and emotional IQ or intelligence, as opposed to the IQ, your intelligence level. I mean, we are all different levels of intelligence in this room. I might be the lowest one. I don't know. But here's what I do know, is that more important than how smart you are, more important than how many college degrees or how successful you are or how wealthy you are, spiritual emotional maturity will determine your potential in life. Spiritual and emotional maturity will determine your potential in this life and in living for Jesus. There's this book that I just got, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Pete Scazzaro. If you got a chance this past week, I hope I said that right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Holding it like this, Pete Scazzaro. But yeah, I know. But if you get a chance, go on YouTube and check out some of his videos. This stuff's great. Great stuff. Melissa and I listened to about 20 minutes of one of his talks online, and we already use one of the phrases that he said to use whenever you're trying to avoid conflict but still want to share frustrations with each other. It's really great stuff. I won't tell you what it was. I'll just let you, got to go look at it. But here's what he says. Pete says this. He says, "It's impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature." Would you agree with that? That you can't be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. And so there's a couple descriptors for what emotional maturity is. If we ask the question, what is emotional maturity? Some would say it's the ability to identify and manage your emotions as well as the emotions of others. And this is true, you guys know this, the way you conduct yourself impacts the way other people act, right? If you get hostile, they're going to get hostile. If you stay calm, most of the time they're going to stay calm. And so he says in his book and in his research, he says, look, Christians all over the country have been studying the Bible for decades and attending church for decades, and they're still emotional infants. They're still indistinguishable in the way they respond to things out in the world. They're indistinguishable from non-Christians when it comes to conflict or relationships or, the emotional maturity aspect of things. Here's one thing that I wish we would hear. I wish that we would hear from the places where Christians work. I wish the coworkers who aren't Christians would be able to say things like, well, that John, he loves Jesus and he loves us. He's a hard worker. He's never lazy. He's always on time. He cares more about us than he does just his own agenda. Wouldn't that be cool? If people in the workplace could see such an amazing difference in you that pointed them to Jesus, that they saw that. But honestly, we don't hear that. We don't hear things like, well, that Christian person that we work with, they're peacemakers. They're hard to offend. They take offense at nothing. They're not defensive. They are the first ones to respond when I go through a crisis. Wouldn't that be cool, And so today I want to talk about 6 signs. We got 30 minutes to talk about 6 signs of spiritual, emotional maturity. And so we're going to go through these. Here's the first one. And actually, I did the negative instead of the positive. When I write a sermon, sometimes I'm like, okay, I can frame this in a negative light or a positive light. Normally, I go the positive way. But today, I went the negative way. And so these are key signs of spiritual immaturity, emotional immaturity, because I felt like it was important to be able to name these characteristics. So the first one is that if you're defensive and easily offended, if you're always defensive, always ready to take every comment to heart and be offended by things, then you might be spiritually, emotionally immature. And I believe this. I asked Melissa to read this, and she didn't get it right away. Tell me if you guys get it. But the statement is this: if you're easily offended, you'll always be offended. Does that make sense? If you're easily offended, you're always going to be offended about something. And do you guys know anybody like that? Huh? That they take offense they figure out some way to be offended about everything someone says or does. And so we got to understand this, man. Satan loves it when he can cause us to be in an emotional, defensive posture. And so let me give you some examples, and you just kind of ask yourself, okay, am I defensive or offended in these situations? Have you ever been in a work group with some other people and you had to make a decision together and every suggestion you made they didn't like? You ever been there? I've been there. It's called board meetings. I've been there. And you know why I have board members? Because sometimes I have terrible ideas. And if nobody told me, Josh is sitting back there shaking his head, yep. If nobody told me, then we'd just be a bunch of yes people going down a bad road, right? And so I appreciate about them. But when your idea isn't accepted, do you take it to heart? Are you offended? When you disagree with someone, I've met people who, if you disagree with them in the slightest, then they think you're the dumbest person on the planet. They can't accept that they could be wrong and you could be right, and so they just get upset about that. I've met people who are constantly asking in their head, well, I wonder what that meant. Now listen, if you got somebody in your family that's hostile toward you, then everything you say is going to go through that filter, right? They're going to be asking the question, well, I wonder if that was a slap. I wonder if that was a way to get under my skin. I wonder if that was supposed to offend me. Here's some of my favorite ones about examples for being defensive or easily offended. What about, and mother-in-laws, I love you, okay? What about when your mother-in-law suggests how you should parent, clean, cook, or dress? Do you take that as an act of love? Or do you take that as an act of offense, right? When you're asked to do something that you think is beneath you because you got skills. You're so intelligent and you've got great skills, and somebody asks you to clean up some mess. This morning, I asked Mary, I said, this is the dumbest thing ever, but she was sitting out there and didn't have anything to do. I said, hey, can you help me with something? I said, those daggone hand sanitizer stations out there, they sit for weeks, and then they don't work when somebody puts their hand under them because they need prime. So you got to do this like 15 times to get the thing to start spitting out some stuff. I said, could you do that for each of those so that they're working when everybody gets here? She said, no problem, you know. But often people get this attitude. Here's something that's hard for me, is when someone makes false judgments about me, especially if it's on Facebook. I mean, if somebody puts something out on Facebook about me or says a comment to me on Facebook for everybody else to see, and it's a kind of a judgmental, making assumptions about my inabilities as a pastor, that's hard. That's hard not to respond to. And sometimes when we've argued, because, you know, between politics and COVID, there's been a lot to argue about. And when we've differed on things, I love the fact that we've come down through a discussion, public discussion. Some of you have seen these, and at the end say, but I love you guys, and I miss you. And then they say, we love you too, you know? It reminds us what the big picture is. Proverbs 19, verse 11 says, a person's wisdom yields patience, and it is to one's glory to overlook what? An offense. That we need to be able to overlook an offense. And so emotionally mature Christians, they're patient with others. They're not just ready to whack somebody out of their life every time they get offended by them, because they're patient. They understand we're all imperfect. We all say things we don't mean, and sometimes we say things we mean that aren't nice. And we can still be patient with them. We're patient with others, and we refuse to be offended. So are you defensive or easily offended? Here's the second one. If you're unaware of how others around you are feeling, you might be emotionally immature. I love Romans chapter 12, verse 9, starting in verse 9, because it describes how the church is supposed to act toward one another. Paul says this, he says, love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted. Everybody say be devoted. Be devoted. He says, be devoted to one another in love, honor one another above yourselves, never be lacking in zeal, but keeping your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. And then in verse 12, he says, be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer, share with the Lord's people who are in need, practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Watch this. Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. And then he says, live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position, and do not be conceited or arrogant. I think one of the main problems about this is that in our sin nature is to only care about ourselves, right? It's like, as long as I'm good, who cares, right? And so a lot of folks, when we walk into a room, when we walk into work, if we're good, all's good. If we're not good, we want everybody to know we're not good. But we're not really thinking about, okay, I wonder about so-and-so. Wonder how they're doing today. That's one thing Melissa likes about her job at Hebron Elementary, and I think several of the schools are this way, that the coworkers care about one another, that they're friends, that they'll text each other or joke back and forth even when they're not in school and they're just missing each other because they hadn't seen each other for a couple snow days or whatever. but they care about one another. When someone dies, they give them cards. When someone gets out of the hospital, you know, or goes into the hospital, they send them get well cards. There's this family kind of attitude. And so, are you unaware of how others around you are feeling? Now, I made this statement yesterday, and I like it. Okay? And it's this, that self-centered people don't listen, they talk. Isn't that true? Self-centered people, they don't listen to you, but they want to talk. And so it drives me nuts when I'm around folks that do this. You're trying to share your heart about something you're going through, and you talk about how you're going through it, and oh, well, that's nothing. You should see what happened to me. And then it's all about them for the next 20 minutes. It's like, how about you just listen? You know? People who are self-centered don't listen, they just talk. Are you good at listening? Are you good at listening? I mean, I know some of you are. I don't know all of you as well, but I know some of you are really good listeners. And so emotionally mature Christians are focused not on their own needs, but on the needs of others. He says, be devoted to one another in love. And I love this. He says, honor one another above yourselves. And the way I've said this before for married couples, and we can say it for friends and family and neighbors as well, you before me. You before me. Can you say that? You before me. Means I'm going to put you before me. I'm going to think about you before I think about me. I'm going to be concerned about you before I'm concerned about me. And in that way, I'm going to show the love of Christ. Here's a third sign that we might be emotionally immature. If we lack control of our emotions. Have you ever lost it? Lost your temper? Oh, baby, I'm telling you. I've lost my temper so much in my life. Holy smoke. I've been the worst witness for Jesus sometimes. I mean, here I was, a pastor, with little kids and living in Racine, Ohio, and out in the yard just cussing up a storm because my mower wouldn't start and I'd pulled that cord 30 times or whatever, it's like, oh. Emotional immaturity. Sometimes we lack control of our emotions. And so, for you guys that are at home watching online, post in the comment line some examples of lack of control of your emotions. So situations that you might see in your culture that are obvious lack of emotional control. So what can you guys think of that are examples of lack of emotional control? What's that? Helping with homeschooling can drive you to lose it. I bet that's happened a lot in homes all around the country. Yeah. What else? What's an example of someone losing control? I've got one. I mean, there's an...
You know who Miles Garrett is?
No.
He's a defensive lineman, all-pro for Cleveland Browns.
Okay.
But it's about a year and a half ago now. In a game, he lost control in the game and took his helmet off and beat the quarterback with the other team. But he is known for doing a lot of really good things. He was suspended for a long time.
Oh.
A really good thing is community. He's like
He
really.
spends like his off season in Africa.
Yeah.
So he does missions and everything,
Yeah.
but then he lost his temper, and that's what he's probably known for.
Yeah, he is.
I mean, that's the bad thing is you lose it one time in public, it's going to be the thing you're known for because they'll put. And now listen, I'm not recommending this. I'm not recommending this, but I downloaded TikTok.
Oh, don't.
Okay, Hope, my daughter's making these videos, and so she wanted me to see them. So I downloaded. Oh my goodness! You want to talk about lack of control of our emotions? You can see all kinds of stuff there. I was thinking about stuff like road rage, yelling at your kids or the coaches at sporting events. You don't know anything about that, do you, Chris? You don't know anything about that. Being yelled at as a teacher, right? By parents who think that you're just not doing their kid right. It's crazy. Arguments with, this is one of my favorites, arguments within ministries. So like, the children's ministry people get in an argument, which I don't think they have yet, but just deciding on what color to paint something, or deciding on how to run VBS, or deciding how we're going to do the event outside. Well, I think that's a dumb idea. And then people get mad and they don't talk, I think one of the best examples of lacking emotional control is this new phrase, which isn't that new anymore. Drew just learned about it 6 weeks ago. But it's being a Karen. You know what that is? Being a Karen. That means you just lose it on people. When you don't get your way, you lose it on people. And so, yeah, that's an example of lack of emotional control. And so lacking emotional control is like handing Satan the keys to your life, isn't it? Lacking emotional control, giving in, because here's what Satan's doing. He's dangling some situation in front of you and saying, lose it, lose it. He's pushing all your buttons, making you as mad as he can make you, making everything go wrong until you erupt like a volcano. And he loves when that happens. Either we will control our emotions, or our emotions will control our life, right? And we'll be known for, like that football player, unfortunately, we'll be known for that instead of being known for the good things. I like what the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 19. He says, though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone. And then he answers why he's doing that. He says, to win as many as possible. To win as many as possible. Isn't that cool? In other words, he says, I could live my life however I want to, and I could be as self-centered as I want to, but instead, I'm going to live my life in a way that I can be a slave to everyone so that I can win people to Jesus. And he talks about all the ways he does that. To the Jews, I became like a Jew. To the weak, I became like the weak. But then in verse 24, he says, do you not know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. He says, no, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave. I like that. Self-discipline. Now, when it comes to exercise, I have none. Okay? I have none. But you put me in a board meeting where there's some, heated discussions or some passionate people, and God just says, look, no matter what happens in this room, you cannot lose it. You can't lose it because you're the leader. And so there have been times when I'm just sitting there going, oh, Jesus, help me to just hear from you, And often God can help me to bring some calm to some passionate discussions. Now, we haven't had a lot of that in a long time. I mean, heck, with COVID-19, everybody's agreeable. Everybody's just like, I don't care. Whatever you guys say is fine with me, Nobody wants to Zoom, so nobody wants to Zoom, so whatever. But he says, I strike a blow to my body to make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. He's talking about eternity. He's saying, I'm going to go into strict emotional training so that I represent Jesus so well to the rest of the world that they will be drawn to him because of my self-control. I love that. I love that his motivation wasn't himself, but was his mission. Here's the fourth one. The fourth sign that we might be spiritually immature or emotionally immature is that the sins and mistakes of others irritate the heck out of you. That you're just like, why are they so dumb? Why won't they get out of the way? Why do they make those dumb choices over and over again? We just get so frustrated with other people's dumb decisions or sinful decisions. Romans chapter 12, verse 3 says, For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think, everybody say, do not think more highly than you ought, of yourself. He said, and the way he says it here, because I mixed it up, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, right? But rather think of yourself in sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. Why is it that we get so irritated? Here's a passage, because I think I skipped ahead. I think that when we get irritated with the sins and mistakes of other people, it's a direct result of arrogance. Would you agree with me on that? That our judgmentalness of others is a direct result of our own arrogance. It's that we have an inflated view of ourselves because we're not self-aware. We're not thinking about our mistakes. In fact, here's what we do if we're arrogant, if we're emotionally immature, here's what we do. We have no grace for other people. We're just like so hateful or make assumptions about how dumb they are or why they made this decision or that decision. But when it comes to us, you know what we do? We make all kinds of excuses. Well, I'm different. I did it because of this or that, right? We all give ourselves lots of cushion, lots of grace. Well, I didn't mean it that way, or I didn't have any choice. But when we look at other people's lives, we've already decided why they're so dumb and why they've made the wrong decision. We don't give people the benefit of the doubt. If someone's driving in front of you and they're going 10 miles an hour and you're stuck by, this happens all the time, and we've talked about this. Going down 79 to Heath, and there's, I'm not pointing at you, Joyce, Joyce Nadolson. I'm not pointing at you, but I'm just saying, when people drive side by side going down 79 and they're both going 45 miles an hour, I want to run them over. And it's like,
What that passing lane in the middle is for.
oh, Josh, is that legal? Dude, there is no passing lane in the middle, Amy Nadolson, Amy Wells.
Are you talking about over in Heath, the double lane, and the passing, or what they call the passing lane?
There's 2 lanes going that way.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
they're going 45, you should be real satisfied.
Oh, okay. But do we ever give them the benefit of the doubt? Okay, maybe they're special. Okay, maybe they're 100. Maybe they can't see very well and they're afraid to go over 45 miles an hour. I don't know.
Maybe God put them there so you'd slow down.
Maybe God put them there so that you could assess your own arrogance. Right? Maybe there's going to be a wreck down the road, and if you'd have just been patient and waited behind those people instead of deciding that they're all stupid and gone in the center lane around them, you'd have missed the wreck, I don't know. But we don't have grace for other people. Matthew chapter 7, verse 7, Jesus says this, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. That's pretty tough, isn't it? The same way that you think and talk about other people is the way that you're going to receive judgment. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. He says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? He says, you hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Emotionally mature people are humble and lead with love, not judgment. Here's the 5th one. I got 5 minutes. It didn't used to be this way. But now we got this stream on the timer. So the stream's cutting off whether I'm done or not. And some of you have seen that happen. Okay? You constantly worry about what others think about you. If you're constantly worried about what others think about you, you might have some emotional growth to go through. That's why, that's high school, right? That's middle school. Middle school is what hell's going to be like. You're just always worried about what everybody else thinks about you. You're going to fight all the time. Poor Amy, she's got to deal with these kids.
I live it every day, man.
You just live in this bubble of fear and intimidation and insecurity. It's awful. But when you grow up, you're not supposed to be like that. You're supposed to understand who God has made you to be, and you're not worried about what everybody else thinks about you. So, again, we're going to go back to Romans 12, which I read by accident a minute ago. Paul says, "For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself in sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to you." One of the things that happened to me when I was in seminary was I was in preaching class, and I was insecure. And the professor said to the whole class, "Now, one thing we're going to do this semester is we're going to have each of you prepare a sermon, and you're going to preach it for the class, and we're going to evaluate it." And I went, "Time out." "What?" I said, "I don't know if I want to do that or not. That could be embarrassing." And he says, "Mr. Harkness, you have an ego problem. Because if your ego is so tiny and fragile that you can't take a little bit of criticism, then you might not be ready to be a pastor, you know." Some of us need to work on the toughness of our image of ourselves. We're so afraid that somebody will think we're imperfect. We're so insecure. The reality is we can have a lot more fun, just like we're having this morning. We can have a lot more fun when we realize, you know what, we're all messed up. We got 3 minutes? Oh, boy. All right, 6. Here's the last one. Your life almost always contains relational drama. If your life always contains relational drama, you probably have an immaturity issue. James chapter 3 says in verse 13, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in humility, and that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual," and listen to this word, he says demonic. "For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice." You guys know anybody that's always got relationship drama? Here's what I say. If you're the only one that always has emotional drama in your life, it may not be everybody else. You're the common denominator. And so in verse 17, he explains what mature Christians are. He says, "But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all," if I get cut off, look up verse 17, James chapter 3, verse 17. "But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure and peace-loving and considerate and submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness." You know what the hardest thing about emotional maturity is? Is that if we're emotionally immature, we can't see it. We're blind to it. And so these 6 indicators help us to kind of ask ourselves and walk ourselves through the process and go, okay, yeah, I got some growing to do. And so I really feel like we've missed this in the church. If you can study your Bible and go to group and go to church all your life and still be emotionally immature, then we've missed something. And when we still look like the rest of the world at work, we've missed something. We need to be transformed and different than everyone else. So let's stand and pray. Father God, I just pray that you would help us to surrender our egos to you. You'd help us to realize that the world doesn't revolve around us, that in fact, that if we want to be powerful witnesses for Jesus, that we need to grow up in our faith and we need to grow up in our emotional intelligence so that we can be used of you in powerful ways and not be swept into conflict and all kinds of things by the enemy. And so, Lord, help us to grow. We give ourselves to you. In Jesus' name we pray. And everybody said, Amen. Did I make it?